Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about simplifying your BYOD management with Microsoft Intune. So we're all going to talk about bringing your own devices. Our speaker is Charity Vaughn. She is an enterprise architect with years of experience focusing on Microsoft Intune and like technologies. Go ahead, Charity, and take it away.
Show you how to configure compliance policies for personally owned iOS devices. Compliance policies help ensure that devices meet your organization's security requirements. These policies are only for managed devices, ones that have been enrolled in Intune. These are the MDM devices I've described in the slideshow. Unmanaged devices are not impacted by these policies. So we'll navigate to Devices, Compliance. Now we'll create a policy. As I said, we're going to do iOS in this example. Click Create. Now let's give our policy a name. From my personal experience, I urge you to use a standard naming convention so that it is easier to find. The volume of policies created will grow rapidly, and trying to find one in particular can be looking for a needle in a haystack if you don't have keywords that you can base a search on. So let's call this BYOD iOS compliance policy. Pretty straightforward. You have the option to create another description for this policy, but it's not necessary or required. Anything that has a red asterisk is a field that needs to be completed. So we'll select Next. Let's start with device health. It's best practice to require that devices are not jailbroken or rooted in the instance of Android devices. So we will block that. It's best practice to require that they're not jailbroken and because such devices can bypass security controls, making them vulnerable to threats. You can also set the device threat level threshold, or you don't have to configure it at all. Now let's go to device properties, where we can set a minimum OS version. Always try to stay up to date with what the most recent iOS is and try to stay within that so that all the latest security patches are applied. For this instance, we're going to say OS 15. You can also set a maximum. You can even set a minimum OS build version. Now let's move on to system security. Requiring a device passcode is critical for protecting data on the device. We'll set a minimum passcode length of 6 digits. Depending on your preference and even requirements from your friends in security, you can make a password very basic or incredibly complex with an alphanumeric requirement and even requiring special characters. Just be sure to prepare your team and your frontline support staff for the volume of calls that they're likely to encounter from angry employees that have been using 1, 2, 3, 4 as their password on their personal phone since the day they bought it. Time parameters can be set related to timeouts for screen lock and password reentry, password expiration, and the number of previous passwords before allowing a password to be reused. Actions for non-compliance are set on this screen. The default entry is mark device non-compliant, and you can set it to be immediate upon detection. You have other options to configure here if you like. If you want to send a push notification to the end user that an action is required on their part, you would set that here. Once we've configured all the necessary settings, we can assign this policy to a group or groups of users. Let me be clear, once you assign and save a policy, it will be activated for all users and devices attached to that group. You'll want to ensure that all of the settings you've configured are correct and ready to be rolled out to your production environment. That being said, you do not have to assign it at this point or even at all. Policies can be drafted and saved without assignment, and you can make a modification to the policy later to include the groups to which you want to assign it. Finally, you'll review your settings closely, especially if you've assigned it, and click Create. That's it. You've successfully configured a compliance policy for personally owned iOS devices. These settings help ensure that all devices meet your organization's security requirements, keeping your data safe and secure. Now let's configure device restriction policies for personally owned Android enterprise devices. This is a great way to ensure your organization's data remains secure while allowing employees to use their own devices. Again, this policy is only applicable to managed or enrolled devices. These settings will not impact users that chose not to enroll. So we'll go to Devices, Configuration, create a new policy. We'll select Android Enterprise in this instance. Now we have to pick the profile type. As I said, we're going to go with device restrictions. And since this is for BYOD devices, we're going to scroll down to the personally owned work profile and select device restrictions. And now let's give our policy a name. Let's call this one BYOD Android Enterprise Restrictions. The little speech I gave before about a uniform naming convention bears repeating, but I'll just hope you were listening the first time. You can add a description if you'd like, but it's optional as we covered before. Let's go to work profile settings. This is where you can decide whether or not you want to allow copy and paste between work and personal profiles. It defaults to block whether or not you want to allow data sharing between work and personal profiles. Work profile notifications while device is locked, meaning if you want to get notifications on the lock screen related to your work profile. If you want to block it, that would prevent sensitive data from appearing on a lock screen. Default app permissions, whether or not you want to prompt, auto grant, or auto deny. You've got several other options here: contact sharing via Bluetooth, screen capture, caller ID, use of a camera, widgets from work profile apps. Intune really likes password settings and gives you multiple times to address it. Again, my earlier speech about password complexity and angry users, especially when it comes to their personal devices, applies here. Under system security, we can enforce a threat scan on apps and prevent app installations from unknown sources in the personal profile, meaning any app installations outside of, say, if it's a Samsung device, the Samsung App Store or the Google Play Store. Then we'll select Next. Last time we didn't assign a group. Let's do it this time. You'll select Add Groups. You'll be provided with the available groups. Let's just select one. You also have the option to exclude groups. If you have, say, an IT test group that you don't want this particular profile to be assigned to, this is where you would add those there. Select Next. Finally, we're back to the summary page. Make sure that everything looks the way you'd like it to be implemented into your production environment. And considering the fact that we actually did assign it to a group, I recommend that you very closely review the settings that you implemented. Make sure they're accurate, because once you click Create, it becomes live, and any user or device impacted by that group will be assigned this profile. Okay. Now, let's configure an app protection policy for personally owned Android devices. App protection policies help secure your organization's data within mobile apps, even on personal devices. These policies are particularly important for MAM, or mobile application management, when a user chooses not to enroll their device in Intune, if you choose to allow that as an option for your users. These policies will also be utilized for managed devices or enrolled devices, but this will be how you protect an application's interaction with and access to sensitive corporate data. This time we'll navigate to Apps and App Protection Policies. We'll create an Android policy. Back to the naming convention. Hate to harp on it. For this one, we're going to do BYOD Android App Protection Policies for all of the Microsoft applications as a group. So here in the targeting of the policy, we're going to select all Microsoft apps. Let's start with data protection settings. Let's configure data transfer settings. We can block the backup of corporate data and prevent the interaction of corporate data to unmanaged apps and allow copies of data to be saved. So let's say for sending organizational data to other apps, you can allow that for all apps, no apps, or apps that you've got a policy configured for. So let's just, for now, say policy managed apps. You can select apps that you want to exempt from this policy if you wish to do so. Do you want to allow saving copies of org data? Now, if you block it, you still have the option to allow it to be saved to other areas anyway. So if you've got a managed OneDrive, a managed SharePoint, you can allow saving there. Telecommunication Telecommunication data refers to being able to make a phone call. So if you want to be able to use the contacts in your Outlook, this is where you would decide whether or not you want to allow it, or a specific dialer app, or a policy managed dialer app. Messaging, if you want to be able to send text messages to your contacts, this is where you'd address that. Receiving data from other apps, do you want to allow it from everything, nothing, or the ones that you've created a policy for? Opening data in Word documents, allowing and blocking. Restricting cut, copy, and paste between other apps. You've got the option to block. Policy managed apps with a paste in, or any app. You can even choose to limit the number of characters that you can cut, copy, and paste. Let's just say for fun, we're going to say only 100 characters can be copied and pasted. Screen capture, do you want to allow screenshots? For obvious reasons, well, maybe not so obvious. If you want to make sure that someone can't take a screenshot of a sensitive spreadsheet, this is where you would block it. Lots of folks like to use third-party keyboards. Do you want to require that it be approved, or do you want to allow them to use any? Encrypting of organizational data, is it required or not? You've got some functionality options you can choose here. Syncing policy managed app data with native apps or add-ins. Do you want to allow printing of organizational data, or do you wish to block it? Web content transfer with other apps. Do you want to manage it through simply Microsoft Edge? And organizational data notifications. This goes back to the lock screen. Do you want, when you've got a new Outlook message, for any of that data to be displayed? It's best practice to require a PIN or biometric authentication to access protected apps. Note that this authentication is applicable at the app level, not device level. In other words, the previous password configurations were specific to the actual device accessibility. This setting addresses implementing a password to launch the applications. So if you launch Teams, for example, you'll be prompted to enter a passcode even though you've already entered one to open your screen. It may make more sense to implement a more secure passcode in this context as opposed to at the device level. Folks certainly don't want to enter a complex passcode just to check their Facebook, but they are more understanding when they need to access that spreadsheet in SharePoint that has sensitive sales projections. Do you want to allow a simple PIN, or do you want to block it in this instance? Do you want to set a minimum PIN length of 6, 8, what have you? Do you want to allow biometrics instead of PIN? Do you want to let them use Face ID? Timeout for an activity before the passcode is required again, the number of days before they have to create a new password, number of previous PIN values to maintain. So if you want to make sure that they aren't repeating the same password they used 3 times ago, you'll set that limitation here. Do you want to apply the PIN when the device PIN is set? So if you want to allow that PIN code from the previous configuration, you can do that here. And how often the access requirement is required, for however long it's been inactive. We've got some other app conditions that we can set actions to take place. So the maximum number of PIN attempts before the PIN is reset, or do you want to go so far as to wipe the corporate data? This would just be the work profile. This would not impact the personal side of things. Offline grace period. So say an individual's taken some time off. Let's say a mom is about to go out on maternity leave. You certainly don't want to set this to a number that's so low that when she comes back, she has to re-enroll. Again, we're faced with the jailbroken or rooted devices, blocking access, or wiping data. Now we're to assignments, which we've covered before, whether or not you want to assign one at all. And here's our summary screen again. As I've mentioned before, this is where you get the chance to review everything that you've manipulated during those previous screens. Make sure that they're what you want them to be, particularly if you've assigned any groups or users to it, and click Create. And that's it. You've successfully configured an app protection policy for personally owned Android devices using Microsoft Intune. These settings help ensure that your organization's data remains secure, even on personal devices. Thanks for watching, and happy configuring.
Awesome. Thank you, Charity. let's go back to our slides. Let me get to the right slide. Okay, we're going to go over our questions and answers. So go ahead and put those in the QA. Before we do that, let's do another poll since those are very popular. And let's launch that. Give you a second to answer that question and give you time to put in some questions so that we can answer them. And we have one ready for you, Charity.
Yes, sir, I'm ready.
All right.
I see the one that's on the screen. Are you suggesting to have BYOD fully enrolled in Intune for MAM? MAM, no, absolutely not. It's not necessary to have the device fully enrolled. That's where the app protection policy comes into play. It's really kind of a personal preference. You know, you need to have a really well-defined implementation plan for what you will and won't accept in BYOD, going so far as to decide exactly which devices you will and won't support. But as far as a BYOD enrolled in Intune, it's not absolutely necessary. Granting them access to the applications that are policy managed would be how you would address the lack of enrollment.
Okay, we got another one that came in. Can you go over admin groups, scopes, and assigning RBAC?
You know, that's a great question. Admin groups and scopes. I think admin groups would, as far as roles go, you need to have a well-defined process in place and in integration with other services as well. I hope I'm on the right track for what you're looking for there. Am I going in the right direction for where you were looking?
Keep going.
Anyway, just making sure that you've got your admin groups properly defined. Obviously you've got the predefined roles in the system that you can use. I recommend creating tailored ones for exactly what you want, but you do have to have the proper access to the system in order to assign anything.
Okay. So on our poll question, to continue on with the topic, we have our proactive services catalog. So if you go to the US Cloud portal, which is just account.uscloud.com, and you click on View FAQs at the top, there's the proactive services catalog, and you find a whole bunch of offerings around Intune and M365 alike. Okay, so Charity, what about if a device, a BYOD device, is stolen and our corporate data is still on there? What happens? What can we do?
Well, you've got the capability to remotely wipe just the corporate data from the device. It's a remote action that the admins with proper access, even if you want to go so far as to giving your frontline support team the access to do so, it's really easy. You just simply send a command from the console, and the next time that device checks in, it will go through the process of just wiping the corporate side of things. It'll uninstall applications. It will remove the restrictions on the device that have been implemented through the console. And you can rest assured that your corporate data is no longer exposed in any way.
Excellent. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so let's progress. So the next thing that we need to talk about is wrapping everything up. So we've heard your suggestions going forward. And we have the next one is going to be migrating VMware to Hyper-V. Look for that one in a few weeks. Everyone will get an invite. It'll be labeled on our portal. So that'll be migrating VMware to Hyper-V. We thank you for attending today, and I'd like you to have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure talking to you today.